This is an interview on the 27th of November 2004 with Sergeant Harold William Marsh, V41129, 39th Battalion, D Company, 17 Platoon. How did you first join the Army, Harold?
Oh, in the militia, we're back in the early days, about 1937, with the, when it, you know, the, well, what would you call it? When they realised that our forces were very depleted, and this was the thing in those days, very little else to do, so we joined the militia.
How old would have you been?
I'd be about 17 or 18 at that time.
And where were you stationed?
At Traralgon. That was B Company, 52nd Battalion. That was their depot.
And when did you decide to join the 39th?
Well, when we were called up full time virtually, we were in and out of camp in the build up to the, you know, as the war developed, they had to have more people coming into the armed forces. And we were in camp full time, and we had just transferred to
You came down to Darley?
No, we're at
Seymour,
Ngambie Road. That's where we volunteered to go to New Guinea with them, to join the 39th.
Who were your mates at the time?
Well, there's Jack Tompkins from Moorhall. He got killed later on. Oh, this is getting a bit difficult now. You mate with everybody in your particular company.
And how long were you down at Darley before you realised you were in serious training?
Well, we went there in about the October, I think, and formed up, and then we were sort of virtually straight into it.
And what did your training consist of at Darley?
Oh, just looking after weapon training and physical training and route marches and all that jazz with basic training.
What was the camp like there at Darley?
Well, it was all in huts, something we'd never been used to. Prior to that, we were always in tents and pallihouses on the ground, on floorboards. This was all in steel huts. It was a training camp, I think, training battalion was set up there.
And when you were a sergeant, what extra duties did you have as a sergeant?
Well, just instruction, PT, and normally filling in for what the loot didn't want to do.
So you would have had a platoon, or?
Yes, full platoon.
And how many would that be?
3 sections, about 30 guys.
Word was that you were heading off to New Guinea. What did you think your duties would be when you got to New Guinea?
Oh, we didn't have a clue what we were going up there as a garrison. That having any knowledge of what we were supposed to do didn't come into the equation.
You probably thought more of an adventure or a chance to travel.
The basic one is glad to get away and do something.
Do you remember a street parade that you had in Melbourne before you went?
Very much so. It's the first time we ever got into shorts. We had a parade down there. I remember going past the Kraft cheese factory and the girls racing out and pinching our legs.
And you had a Christmas dinner, I think, at Darley?
Yeah, just prior to leaving, that's right, yes.
And how did you get to Sydney?
Well, they trained on Boxing Day, early Boxing Day, and down to Spencer Street and then through to Sydney.
Do you remember the harbour at the time? And
certainly do, because I'd been there for 1930, 39, or 38, I think, with my sister. Went over on a trip with her. It was, a bit of a revelation to go back and see it in a different light. The train pulled down at where Darling Harbour is now. And then we got on a ferry and went round under the bridge round to the Woolloomooloo, and looming up through the fog was these 3 big ships. We always see was the superstructure. One was the Queen Mary. We thought we were going on that. And then the ferry veered off and went into Woolloomooloo, but here was the Aquitania. We thought that was good enough for us. So we boarded that. One of the first impressions was after we'd stowed out, got allocated to our cabins, we went out on the deck to see what was going on, and one of the guys said, "Oh, look, they're loading beer." But the slings, they weren't coming aboard, they were going off. It was declared a dry ship. That was a big disappointment to start with. But anyway, that was it.
Do you remember anyone that you shared your cabin with?
Not particularly, not now, no.
And what was your cabin like?
It was an enormous cabin. It was up on A deck. It was a first-class cabin. And they put bunks in. I think there was eight sergeants in it. And just in sort of bunks, they built bunks to accommodate them. I remember there was a fan there, so it was very, very hot. Of course, everything was blacked out. We switched it on when we got underway the following morning, and that fan just conked out before we were coming into Moresby Harbour.
So did you remember much about the trip on the boat?
Oh, not a great deal, no. Oh, there was a couple of incidents, a couple of days out, there was a bit of an alarm, and the destroyers, they turned about and laid down a smoke screen. There was a sub hanging around apparently, and they did a little bit of an exercise, and it was for our benefit, but very interesting.
Excitement.
Yes, there was, certainly was.
And I think you had a sports day on the ship too. Do you remember that?
They did, yes. So not participating, that it was a terrifically, that many soldiers on the deck, plus all the other personnel, and very hard to move around. And anyway, that was very good. Everybody seemed to enjoy it.
Was the ship pretty crowded?
It certainly was. I went down to where the boys were. Well, that was one of my responsibilities, to see whether they were okay down below the waterline. Didn't enjoy that very much. I wouldn't have stayed down there for 5 minutes. It was very, very concentrated.
What was the morale like at the time?
Oh, I would say it was pretty good. It was a big adventure, you know, going on a big ship for a bit of a sea cruise, getting paid to do it.
And how long did the journey take?
About 7 days, I think. Could have been a little longer, could have been a little less, but I think it was around about the week we're on it.
Do you remember the boat pulling into Port Moresby, into the harbour?
It went aground. Firstly, it couldn't make the wharf, it was too deep, the draft. So we had to offload onto destroyers, and they put us onto into the jetty.
Did any natives come out in boats or anything?
Oh, they were there, the kids diving for pennies and this sort of thing. That's as I remember.
So how did you feel then, once you'd actually landed at Port Moresby?
Wondered where the hell we came to. First impressions, you know, walking along the jetty, and there's all the natives lined up with their backs to the seawall, with a piccaninny on one breast and a pig on the other. And that was one incident I do remember. So
It would have been pretty hot compared to Melbourne weather.
it was, particularly had that tropical atmosphere, you know. It's a peculiar smell that you know about the tropics. I think Ross would know about that.
Once you'd offloaded, where did you think you were going?
We did not have a clue. They just made us ashore, and then they said we've got to go out into the scrub a bit, out to where you'll be camping. And that was full gear, and they just marched us out for 7 mile drone. As it turned out, that's where we were going, because nobody knew at the time.
Do you remember the march?
Yes, I do.
Do you remember the fellas, what they were saying? And
I won't repeat it for typical army language.
And when you got out there, what was there?
Nothing.
So what did you do?
Well, we just had to spread out on the ground and try and have a sleep. Get bitten alive by mosquitoes. No water and no watering points or anything like that. Only what you had in your water bottle.
And there was no camp there?
No, nothing.
What do you remember?
That was one of the mismanagement from the upper echelon. All the goods that we needed immediately were down at the bottom of the hold, weren't they? We didn't see anything like that for about a week or two, I don't think.
What was your first job that you remember?
They were just sort of setting up the camp to the best of what was available to us.
How did you manage for your water?
Well, unfortunately, we're right on the western end of the drome, just up in the foothills, just 200 or 300 yards away from the strip itself. It was in a valley, and there was a water line went through the drome, and there was a sort of a hydrant where they used to fill the tankers and that sort of thing. And so we used to get our water from there. Hot
water.
Hot water on tap.
And describe the 7 Mile drome, what it looked like and what was there.
Well,
any planes?
Pardon?
Any aeroplanes there?
Yeah, there were a few planes. There was a few the old transport planes they used for the mines, the old German junkers, three engine things. They used to transport the machinery and so forth up to Balala and around that area. There were a few army planes there. I just forget what they called them, but they were twin-engine attack bombers, I think, and there was 2 or 3 of them around. As they were the only planes that were there.
Mm. And what was the terrain like?
Well, it was in a valley naturally, and there's hills rising on both sides of the drome.
Was it scrubby or?
Scrubby, yeah, just like the arid country around here, you know.
Mm. What was your first projects that you had to do with your men?
Well, guarding the drome. You just have to mount a guard on that, which consisted of just a platoon or 2 go down and just sit in the shade wherever you could. And that was it. Don't know what we were supposed to do if anything happened. Everything was very, very vague up there. It was.
So did you do any training? Did you train your men?
Very little. And of course, with the supply boats came in, we had to go take the troops in there to put on working parties and unload them.
And how were you clothed at the time?
Just an ordinary khakis.
And not too regimental?
No, there's very, very little parade work or anything like that, as I remember.
Do you remember your cookhouse? What was that like?
Oh, just going back a long time, I think. As I remember it, first it was just a sort of a rock filled up and a couple of bars across and a few dixies and, big steel pots for the cook to cook our bully beef and whatever he could lay his hands on.
What do you remember about your meals? What was your basic food?
Oh, basic. It was very basic. It was goldfish for the first few weeks. As everybody remembers those things. And baked beans and bacon and butter in tins, or if you had any bread to spend it on. Pretty rugged.
What did you do of a night time?
Get under your mosquito net and get away.
So you would have had your tents by then?
Yes, after a while. The tents did arrive after about a week, I'm sure.
Who did you share your tent with?
Well, I was with platoon headquarters. Well, there's Lieutenant Conley, Peter Conley, and Bomber Pike, our driver, and Wilkie, the batman. There's 4 of us in it.
You'd been there a couple of months, and do you remember when you saw the first Japanese plane fly over?
Oh, yes.
What did you think? And what was the general morale of the camp?
Well, it was anticipation, wasn't it? A little bit hesitant, wondering what was going to happen. And we saw these planes coming in over the mountains. They went over Moresby and dropped a few bombs there, then disappeared back over the mountains, and then thought, oh, they must have gone. And then we suddenly saw them coming back, heading in a direct line for where we were on the drome. We're in line with the T parking section of the drome. And along there they had a few of the Junkers and the Lockheed Hudsons, the Australian Air Force. And they of course spotted those, and they were all parked nicely for the attacking planes. And they came there and we had slit trenches dug by this time. And we jumped into them, and then we saw the bombs coming down and heard the crackle and the roar and bang, 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 that was it. Well, it popped up and the Air Force boys had shifted their planes. They must have been game because they shifted them while the bombs were falling. They got a few of the others and caused a fair bit of damage at the time. Fortunately, there are no casualties in there. The bombs, the first stick of bombs, they straddled our area and caused a bit of a havoc. Blew a few holes in the tents, and I know we had a box of grenades in our tent, and a bit of shrapnel went through that, but fortunately none of the grenades were primed and nothing exploded. But the only thing happened was I had a ukulele and put a bit of shrapnel through that. It didn't stop playing it.
How often were the bombing raids?
Well, they were practically daily after that, but fortunately they didn't come near us again because they learnt their lesson the first time not to leave planes up where they could be bombed.
Do you remember when the Aquitania was bombed in the harbour? Not the Aquitania.
The McDougal.
Start again. Do you remember when the McDougal was bombed?
Yes, very much so. We were aboard that day.
You were aboard that day it was bombed?
My lieutenant and myself, we'd come off to organise something ashore, and when the alarm sounded, of course, the ship picked up at the lines and they get out to sea to dodge the bombs. And we watched it from under the ack guns.
So it actually went back out in the harbour too?
Yes, a zigzag around to try and dodge the bombs.
And you would have seen the bombs?
Oh, yes. As the ship disappeared in the cloud of spray, and fortunately it wasn't hit that day. I think the following day they got it. They came back and had another go. A friend of mine from Bensdale here, he was on board when it got hit.
What was his name?
Arthur Grasby.
Do you remember the natives working with you at the time in the unloading parties?
No, I don't remember natives working with us.
No.
Mostly all diggers. Down the hatches and up the top, loading the slings and unloading them.
How much were you paid a week?
Oh, ordinary army wages. I was on the magnificent sum of about 10 and 6 a week, I think. That's 10 shillings and sixpence.
And did you get a beer allowance?
No. Oh, yes, we did for a while. They used to give us a bottle of beer every now and again.
Would have been pretty hot.
It was, but we worked that out. You put the bottle in a woolen sock and you'd saturate with water and hang it in a tree and there's rapid evaporation. Well, that's what refrigeration's all about. Is it cool enough to drink? If it lasted that long.
Did you get many letters and parcels from home, from your family?
Not a great deal, but apparently we got all that was sent. There must have been a lot missing.
Mm. You'd been at the 7 Mile. Were you shifted at all?
Yeah, so when the bombing got too severe, they were raiding around, so they decided to shift us off there, and we went over a couple of ridges, I think, and set up camp there and did a bit of patrolling down Bootless Inlet. So they started to realise that things were, working against them and the way it was developing.
Did you hear news through the ranks that the Japanese were heading south?
Yes, we got all the news eventually. That we heard that Singapore had gone and Rabaul had been taken, and of course we were very apprehensive about that.
So how did you feel? Did you feel, well, where next?
Well, naturally, yes, especially when the Coral Sea battle was on, because we had to set up fortifications in the Bootless Inlet there, laying wire out in the water and then wiring the mangroves with barbed wire, setting up fixed line firing spots for the Vickers machine guns. And then in addition to that, they made us dig trenches in the hill behind it in the rocks.
About this time, the hierarchy must have decided that they needed more troops up in the hills or over the mountains, the Owen Stanleys. Did you know you were going to be going up the Owen Stanleys and over to Kokoda
Well, not at that stage, of course. Hindsight is a very good teacher, and looking back now, they must have realised the Japs were mounting an attack. The Coral Sea battle, well, they couldn't put on a front nor seaward attack in Moresby, so they realised that they would land on the north coast. So I think B Company it was, they sent them over the mountains under Captain Templeton, and they sent their supplies round by boat to Buna. And that's the first inkling we had of that situation. And we realised that we were all going to go eventually.
How long was it once B Company had walked over that you actually, D Company was getting prepared to go over?
Well, I suppose it'd be couple of weeks by the time each company had started out on their trek over, and then when the Japs had landed on the north coast, the B Company were involved, between Oivy and Buna around that area. That's when they flew us over to reinforce them when they started to attack Kokoda.
But what happened? You couldn't actually land.
No, in the particular plane I was in, when we got over Kokoda, we looked out and there was barricades all along the strip. So the pilot said, "Well, can't go in there," and we could see the troops running down there to clear. It was too late. We had to get out of the clouds were closing in. You got a very limited time for aerial activity up in those mountains, and they decided to take us back to Moresby.
And what did the pilot say to you?
Well, he said in the event of an attack by Zeros, if there's any enemy aerial activity around, he said, "I'll come out the door," he said, "and I'll put my fingers up like that to indicate a zero." He said, "The number of them," he said, "I'll indicate by my fingers and give you the clock signal, whether it's 1 or 2 o'clock, wherever they are." So anyway, we just cleared the deck and headed towards getting out of the clouds. And the pilot came out and he did the inevitable, and he said 2 and indicated the 2 o'clock. And I thought, so we looked out our window. I was with the Bren gunner right forward on the starboard side, and looked out the window, and there's these 2 planes merging out of the cloud cover heading straight for us. God, this is it. So I said, "Well, I do, Sarge." I said, "Well, bust the window with your gun and have a go at him." I said, "I don't want to die here." So anyway, which he did, and just about he cocked the gun, and I said, "Just a minute," he said. I said, they were 2 of our own
Kitty hawks.
Kitty hawks. Talk about a sigh of relief.
And then you went back?
Went back to Moresby and got abused by the pilot for breaking the window of his plane.
And
then we had to walk the following day. We set out to walk it, and it took us half an hour to fly it and 7 days to walk it.
And that would have been the rest of the battalion?
That's right. The D Company was about the last. No, E Company was the machine gunners. They were behind us again. Actually, us being a purely infantry company, well, they wanted us there first.
What was it like setting off up the track?
Terrible. Got a couple of yards up the hill, had to rest, didn't we? Didn't realise there were so many muscles in your body that ached. But anyway, you just had to keep going.
What was the track like then? What do you remember about it?
Well, it was reasonable then compared with coming back after a few thousand troops had gone over it. The mud and, the continual insecure footing, and the heat, and then at night time it was cold.
What was the jungle like? Was it thick?
Well, in parts it was. It varied from, low-lying, scrubby stuff around, not similar to our country out here. There's gum trees all over the place down on the lower reaches, but when you got up there, you got into the real jungle and the moss jungles up the top. It was very, very, very varied type of timber.
On your trip up, did you realise that you'd be meeting the Japanese?
Well, I suppose it was behind our mind. You didn't think about those things. You had the job in hand to do first to get there.
And when you did, how far up did you get before you met B Company and part of D Company when you joined up your battalion?
Well, Deneke is about a day's march from Kokoda, that's on the south side, and they'd been forced out of Kokoda. That's when Owen was killed, our CO, and 2 or 3 others, and we formed up at a village called Deneke, and the CO who had taken over, he was one of these gung-ho blokes. He decided...
What was his name?
I'll think of it in a moment, I just forget.
Cameron.
That's it. He decided he wanted us to retake Kokoda, so he gave B Company the job of going back in and taking it. And we, Don Company, we had to set up an ambush at a village called Oivy, on the Oivy Track. That was on the Kokoda, on the Buna side of Kokoda. So we had to go down there and stop any possible infringement from the Japs that were around. And I remember we set off at about 6:30 on the morning. This attack was supposed to be mounted, and we got down at a village called Parivi. That's where we encountered our first Japs. They were raiding a village garden. Got to the junction of the track from Deneke to the Oivy track, and we Bidstrup, our OC, he gave us our instructions. My loot, I was with the 17th platoon. My loot, he took a bullet in our first encounter, and he was wounded that bad he couldn't do anything about it.
What was his name? Was that
Herb Crawford. He was a reinforcement officer from over the Middle East. And I took over the platoon then and to take up this ambush position while the remainder of the company set up their positions. One CI was supposed to stop them coming from the Kokoda side and let the other crowd from the opposite end. And we had hardly got into our position. It was only about 80 metres or something from battalion headquarters when we spotted these Japs coming along. So we immediately got into a firefight, and I lost one bloke immediately. He got killed right on the track, and at the same time the rest of the company were involved at the rear of me. So we had to retire into the jungle to set up a perimeter. That's why we stayed overnight, because we had I tried to contact company headquarters to get instructions to what we were supposed to do under those conditions. My runners couldn't get through. There was gaps between us and the company headquarters, and unbeknown to me at the time, they had sent 2 runners to try and contact me, and they both got killed. So that was the situation. We just stuck there. So we set up as best we could, got our wounded and set up in the jungle and stayed there overnight. We were wondering what the devil was going on, and lost 2 more blokes. A local boy by the name of Joe Dwyer, he went out to try and get some water. He just disappeared into thin air, didn't see or anything about what happened to him. And another one tried to do the same and look for Joe, and he disappeared too. So what could we do? Just stay there. So anyway, that was overnight, and then the following day we had to we knew that the long range term was we had to get back to Deneke, to our base. So we had to get through the jungle. It took us a couple more nights to get there, carrying the wounded with us.
How many of you would have been at the time?
Well, it was about 30 in the full platoon. Of course, that was decimated by the numbers we had killed, and the number that the wounded we had to carry.
And then you rejoined, you finally got back?
We eventually got there, yes, after a lot of worry and hardship. A couple of days' time we got back into Deneke.
Did you have enough supplies?
Well, we only had the rations we took off. It was only supposed to be a day's exercise, and we had just had to eat. The natives, we struck quite a few of those, and one of them took us into their village, and they gave us a lot of bananas and pawpaw to eat. And while we were there, I think it was Gordon Bailey said to me, he said, "Hey Sarge," he said, "this is quiet, isn't it? And listen, everything had quiet and rough." And I said, "I don't like this," so we thought we'd better get out of it. Because by that time we knew exactly where to go to pick up the track to get back to Deniki after being in the jungle. So anyway, we thought, oh well, we picked up our traps. And just as we were regaining the main track, you could see they'd had us under observation. You could see the leaves close, and it's just all we saw was the movement of the leaves.
And it was the Japanese?
No, it wasn't the Japs. It was the natives, because they were a little bit against us too. We didn't know whether they were friendly or hostile. But they let us through anyway. Well, fortunately, we were armed. They wouldn't have been no fight. It would have been they wouldn't have had hope. We'd give Tommy guns against spears, sort of thing. So anyway, next morning, we're just the foothills in Deniki, and we just sort of come to, and after resting the night, and they could hear this whistling coming down the track. It was Tosser Morris, and one of our other mates. He'd come down looking for us. Didn't know, that he'd strike us. Well, we were right then. We got back to battalion headquarters. So that was the first episode of us in action.
Now, what do you remember after Deniki?
Well, the Japs eventually attacked there after 2 or 3 days. We realised they were coming. The E Company took the full brunt of that. We all had our allotted positions. Fortunately, we weren't involved in any firefight as such, just the odd, mountain gun and this sort of thing lobbing amongst us. That one particular incident I can remember, we were in our positions, and as I say, E Company and Don Simonson, they did all the dirty work in that section. And Bill Merritt, the OC of E Company, he said, "Harold," he said, "I got a present for you." He had a 38 Smith & Wesson hanging in his finger covered in blood. He said, "I got a present for you. It belonged to Bully Bunny Pulfer, who one of his sergeants had just been killed." I said, "I don't want that, because once you've got a revolver on you, well, you're a marked man. They immediately think that you're officer types. Of course, they're number one target."
And the Japanese used to pick off the snipers they'd snuck in the trees.
Yeah, so anyway, I accepted it, which was all the more weapons you could carry, the better. And I put it on the belt at the back of my body.
But you didn't really want it?
No, I didn't want it. No, it disappeared. I thought I'd have that as a souvenir to bring home, but it disappeared amongst a lot of other things.
What rifle did you have, or gun?
At that time, I had the Thompson submachine gun.
And only one person had that in a section?
Well, it all depends how many you could get hold of, but fortunately we had 2 of them. And yeah, I'm not sure that was it there.
How did you get your ammunition?
Well, they were limited supplies naturally, with the the inability of the carriers to carry much over the mountains. But they did a few airdrops apparently up at Myola, and we never seemed to be in short supply, although it did run pretty close to it eventually, especially back at Isharava there, when the stink was on properly.
When the Japanese had been reinforced and you were gradually getting pushed back, you were pushed back to Isharava, what happened there?
Well, we just had to set up your defensive positions and hope for the best and wait for them to come through.
You dug trenches?
Well, which you could. It was fairly rocky around there. And
you didn't have shovels?
No such things. Like later on, I think that was part of the equipment.
When you're at Isharava, were you cut off at any time?
I personally was again, yes. We used to have this standing patrol forward of the battalion headquarters, about 20 minutes down the track. and it was the head of a bit of a valley where you could see across where the nips were, and that's where we set it up. This particular night we were there, of course it rained every night, thunder and lightning, and shocking place it was. And I can remember my platoon headquarters was just in off the track a bit. Don Simonson, he was with us. He was the E Company lieutenant at the time, and I remember I was sitting under my poncho. I used to pull down the Thompson submachine gun and clean it because they were very susceptible to stoppages. Any little bit of dirt would have stopped them, and I used to clean it every night. And I just finished this, and this explosion happened right on the track. The Japs had come through and they had attacked the patrol right on the track itself. And of course everything closed down. You just don't make a noise, you don't move, you don't do anything. Just wondering what the devil's going on. And the next minute I hear a voice say, "Sarge, where are you?" Well, that was immediately, this is all in hindsight now, you're looking back. Well, you don't give away your position because the Japs, that's one of the ruses the Japs used to use. If you said, "I'm here," well, the next minute you'd expect a burst of machine gun fire or something, or an attack with a bayonet or something like that. But I just kept quiet, and then eventually everything settled down because you had to wait till daylight then, and we found out what had happened. See, that's the night Gordon Barley, he got wounded, and he got back through, thank God.
So were you actually cut off then?
Yes, at this particular time, yes, so we had to take to the hills to get up on the ridge and try and get it, because we were realising at the same time that the Japs were between us and our battalion headquarters again.
And how many of you were there?
Well, there was a full platoon of us at the time. I'd been my platoon had been taken over by Lieutenant Sword at that time, and he was with us naturally. This is when Snowy Pa was with us.
What was he like, Snowy Pa?
Oh, very, very good sort of a bloke to have with you. So anyway, we worked it out after a lot of discussion. We'd get up on top of the ridge and follow the ridge back to battalion headquarters. After a lot of climb, we'd get up there and we come across a signal wire, because the Japs had been along there too, so we put a bayonet through that and cut it. And the next minute there's a rat-tat-tat, and Snow had let go with a burst of his machine gun, because we were all in line going up this steep incline. It's about half a dozen. I can remember my steel helmet finishing up down the bottom of the gully. He got knocked off, like the domino effect. Everybody got knocked over.
And who was it doing the shooting?
Well, Snowy he shot first and asked questions after. There was nobody in the hut. It was deserters apparently. So that was the episode in that little respect. So anyway, we turned in the right direction and followed this ridge around. After a couple of nights we did get back, and the first troop we saw was the 2nd 16th Battalion. They just arrived, saved our bacon apparently.
So how'd you feel when you saw them?
Mighty relieved, but then they told us that our mob was still under attack down below, so we had to go back and we went back and joined our battalion headquarters. That this is, from there on, it's very vague. As for the whole set, it's pretty vague as far as I was concerned, because malaria was taking over.
Mm. Well, you'd been in the jungle for possibly 6 weeks, and how did you manage to sleep?
Well, in short bursts, if you're lucky.
And what was the morale like amongst your mates?
Oh, it was still there, it was all stuck together.
Did you share your food?
Well, whatever you had, well, naturally, that's right. Mm.
And do you remember it raining?
Oh, every night. It used to rain feet of a night time. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the clouds would start to gather, and then you'd have your big storm, and then it would belt down and go till about 3 o'clock the following morning.
You would have been wet all the time?
Absolutely, yeah.
What were your feet and boots like?
Pulp.
Did you ever remember a break in the fighting?
Well, it wasn't continuous fighting, it was off and on. Unfortunately, where I was involved, there wasn't there. We weren't in the the main theatre of it. This is as I remember, and you had your breaks. But of course, the 21st Brigade had arrived by then, and they took the brunt, especially the 2nd 14th Battalion. Who, without them, we would have just been history. They would have wiped straight through. How the devil they didn't do it beforehand? If they hadn't known the number of troops they were up against, they could have walked straight through, but they just did not. And it's one of those funny things that happen in wartime.
How did you look after your wounded?
Well, everybody had what they call a field dressing, and that was about it. You just patched them up as well as you could.
One of your lieutenants was shot, wasn't he?
That's back in the Ivy part there, but down at Kokoda, yes.
And he
took a gunshot wound to the head, and he was walking wounded actually, and he insisted that he make his own way back to Deniki. He never made it. There's a sequel to that story at the reunion a few years back. Nobby Earl, our padre, he'd been up in the tropics there for years prior to the war apparently, and knew what was happening up there. And he was telling me the sequel to that was that the tribes around there, this is long-term hatred of the white man for the abuse that they gave him in the early days of the gold, rush up there. And they'd got hold of him and they'd murdered him apparently. And Nobby said there was a sequel because the war crimes eventually found out who did get him, and they hung 3 of the natives for that atrocity. Well, called atrocities, only payback, So that's just one instance of what happened.
Do you remember the retreat back down the track after Isharava?
Well, I was invalidated out around about that period.
You had malaria?
I had malaria, it was bad, yes, and you had to reach a certain temperature before they'd evacuate you. Well, apparently I had reached that and passed it some time back, and I don't remember much about the
So you don't really remember walking back down?
Well, just fleeting glimpses of memories of it. It's going back with all the badly wounded people and the fuzzy wuzzies came with their stretchers and more troops coming up and passing them. The only recollection main recollection is seeing the hospital where we were up at Koitaki and go in there and they cleaned you up and gave you a feed which you immediately rejected.
And what happened then?
Well, you're in hospital. I was in hospital for about a week, I suppose, and then you rejoined your unit and they gradually reinforced and we were down the Brown River, I think, and they've got that time the fighting had got back to Irabara. I can remember lying in the hospital listening to the 25-pounders. Have you got the?
I suppose you're happy to hear that.
Certainly was. That then, as I say, I got discharged and back to the unit and re-equipped and everything, and did a bit of training. In the meantime, of course, the troops were gone back over the mountains. The nip had had enough, and then in the October, November, we got flown over to Buna and Gona, around that area.
Did you go to Gona and Buna? Oh, you did go to Gona and Buna?
Yeah.
And what was that like?
Oh, that was worse than the mountains, I think, with the swamps and the mayhem that was over there and the stinking situations we had to go through.
And when you got there, were the Japanese dug in?
Oh yes, they were right along the seashore there, and that's where they stayed and died.
What was your job?
Well, I was a quartermaster then. I was responsible. I wasn't like platoon sergeant to see, so I wasn't involved in the actual fighting, but supplying the food and just virtually looking after the troops.
But the conditions would have been pretty bad for the troops.
Oh, they were shocking. Yeah. You're just living in the swamps, putting up with the disgusting conditions.
So you would have come back with the main battalion
Yes, he was one of the 35 that were left at the finish.
One of the 35 that were
A
left.
place called Huggins Roadblock. That was a shocking place.
It would have been pretty tough.
Yep.
And did you march back out?
Well, yes, we had to march back to the strip to catch the plane back to Moresby. They're in the hospital again for more malarial treatment. And then after that we were regrouped and we were ready. Meantime the Japs were attacking Wow. I think it was, and we were out. I just re-equipped them all with the new weapons and, you know, all their gear. We're supposed to go up there and expecting to step out of the plane under fire. That's the way the situation was. I'd just taken their lunch out at this particular time, out to where they were operating. And word came to recall everybody, all troops, and we were got to be on the Duntroon the following morning to come back to, we'd been relieved and come back to Australia.
How did you feel?
Oh, terrific.
When you're up on the track and that, did you ever think like every day, every step could be your last?
Well, naturally, yes. We did not expect to be able to get out of it. So, you know, the odds are against us all the time, and still we survived.
And you came back, did you go to the Atherton Tablelands?
Yes, we came through a cyclone coming back that night and up by train up to the Tablelands and set up camp for a couple of weeks. And then they decided to send us on leave, and that's when we came home.
How did you get back to Melbourne?
Well, by train after about a week in Brisbane, and then to Sydney, and then had a break there, and then on to Melbourne. And
when you got to Melbourne and you came back home to Traralgon,
Rita was waiting for me at Smith Street.
she must have missed you. And did you get married?
We got married, yes, on the 10th of April 1943.
Oh, that's great. And after you got married, you still had malaria and...
Yes,
Did
doing
you
the
think
circuit
there's-
of the hospital and the convalescent depot and the Caulfield there where they processed all the troops. I was B-class non-tropical, and eventually they called for guys with 4 years active service and 40 years of age. You could get a discharge. So I made it applied. I was about 27.
Put your hand up.
Yep, and it
You earned it.
followed me through, yeah.
That's right.
So that was the end of my experience in the army. Got discharged in the January.
How did you feel when you heard the 39th had been disbanded?
Well, disappointed naturally, and wondered why, and nobody hasn't told us yet why it was. It's one of those secrets that will be remaining with the government, I suppose.
Yeah.
Possibly our new Governor-General will be able to do something about it, which he suggested he's going to.
But where were you when the war ended?
We were in Melbourne. I was doing shift work at the time. I remember the...
And did you go out and celebrate?
I think we didn't we?
How did you find your senior officers and how did they treat you?
Well, that's a pretty hard one, isn't it? Well, we didn't think much of our original officers because they were all old First World War diggers. Well, we had to respect them, and naturally you accepted that discipline, which was part and parcel of the setup. I didn't give them that much of a respect. That the guy that took over from Peter Conley, he was invalided back to Australia before we went over the track. He earned his rank in the over in the Middle East. He got his commission in the field, so he was a terrific bloke. Crawford but didn't get to know him that well because he didn't know him long enough. But you must pick up something from them, which is, you know, his part that he passed on to me.
Did you remember the incident back in Moresby when there was an accident and Peter Connolly was burnt.
Well, that's another time I was in hospital at the time with my first bout of malaria. When I got back to the camp, no Peter Connolly.
So what was the story?
Well, they'd got their first issue of a field cooker, their first issue of fresh meat, which was a leg of pork apparently, and that was nicely cooking, and they decided, this is the story, it's only hearsay as far as I'm concerned, they wanted a cup of tea and the billy wasn't boiling enough, so he just thought, I'll fix this, and he put a couple of plugs of jelly into it. Normally jelly has got to be detonated with a detonator, but it exploded, given enough heat, it'll blow. It blew everything to bits. Blew him to bits too. No, not to bits, but badly burnt, and he was invalided back to Australia. Never saw him again.
What were the worst conditions that you remember having to fight in?
Well, I would say over in Gona and around that area, living in that slush and stinking, terrible place. It'd have to be the worst, even though the track was, pretty odious.
As sergeant, one of your special jobs, or your main job, was to be at the rear of the patrol to look after your platoon.
Well, normally all sergeants, well, they are even in the parade ground drill. You are either in the front giving the instructions in lieu of the loot. When he appears, well, you revert to the rear of the platoon. Well, this is what the situation was when we were in action. I was at the rear looking after what was going on. And then when Crawford got hit, I was called to forward because he was wounded, took a gunshot wound to the head, and I immediately went forward, because apprehensive then, that's on. Didn't realise, this was our first real action, and I was very, very hesitant at the start and couldn't get my mind together apparently, looking back in hindsight of course. And he exploded, he said, for Christ's sake, Sergeant, do something. So which I did, immediately got into action and organised myself and sent the different sections in their respective positions to contact where this bullet had come from, which we eventually found. And I think I might have fixed him, because I sent Gordon Bailey, he was one of the section leaders in one circular movement, and another one to encircle the possibility of where these chaps were. And I was crossing this open section, I heard a zing, and the bullet whipped past my ear, and I thought, God, this is getting too close. I just happened to glance up, and there's a chap had me lined up over a log. So I went to ground, and he sort of disappeared back behind the log. So I pulled the pin out of a grenade and lobbed it over there, and I heard a bit of a scuffle and a yelp, and that was the last I saw of him. We inspected the place later, but there was a lot of blood there, but he had disappeared. Apparently I only wounded him. Just cleared it out anyway. Anyway, that's that first little episode.
What do you think is important for future generations to remember about the New Guinea campaigns?
Well, I would suggest that, they be taught about it and then make up their own minds, which is, we're all human beings, we've got a brain of our own. Let them use it for their own benefit. I wouldn't suggest one way or another.
And what are your feelings towards war?
Well, it should be banned. It's a stupid way of solving problems.
And what did you think of the politicians of the day, back in your day?
Well, we were young and didn't have much thought about politicians. We only did as we were told. We were a generation that, expected to do our duty, if you can put it that way. But different story now, though. If they told me to do what we did in those days, I'd tell them to go to hell.
When you came back to civilian life, did you find your army experience changed your life in any way?
Well, it did. You had that sense of responsibility. I think that will help me in my future years in the organisation I was with. The ability to lead men and organise yourself and do the job you're supposed to do to the best of your ability.
And you came back to Melbourne and settled at Collingwood?
Oh, right. Yeah, well, for a short time. I didn't like the city life. But, we were living in the back of the Collingwood Town Hall virtually, and used to get on off the train there. And I decided, well, the RSL was in the Collingwood Town Hall, so I went in there and joined up, got my badge, and which I've still got, and I still barrack for Collingwood. So,
Excellent. Well done.
so that was it.
Well, on behalf of the 39 Battalion History Unit, I thank you very much for this really interesting interview, and we've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity.